The mysterious signal. The silence of space was only broken by the hum of the warship Aquila as it drifted through the dark void, its engines barely whispering against the emptiness. Captain Darius Aldren stood at the helm, gazing out at the endless abyss. The stars shone dimly on the far horizon, a cold reminder of the loneliness that often came with deep space missions. But this time, something was different. Ensign Lyra Morrow's voice broke the silence, crackling over the comms from the communications station. "Captain, you're going to want to see this." Darius turned sharply, his brow furrowing. He walked over to the console where Lyra was seated. Her fingers were hovering over the console's touchpad, eyes wide with concern. "I've been receiving an encrypted distress signal," she said, voice low and tense. "The origin seems to be from the Celoria sector, an area considered abandoned, uninhabited. There's a fleet of ships coming towards our location. But," she hesitated, glancing back at Darius. "But what?" Darius asked, his voice a mix of curiosity and caution. Lyra took a deep breath. "The message itself, it's not just a distress call. There's a strange frequency mixed in with it, something we've never encountered before, almost like a coded pattern or a warning." "Run it through the encryption analyzer," Darius commanded, his tone now sharper. "I want to know who's out there and what they want." Lyra worked quickly, tapping in the command, her fingers dancing across the console. The ship's systems hummed in response, processing the signal. After a few moments, a series of strange symbols flashed across the screen. It was no language they recognized. "What are we looking at?" Darius asked, feeling his nerves tighten. "I'm not sure, Captain," Lyra replied. "The symbols. They look like alien script, but it's distorted, like it's been scrambled or corrupted over time." Darius glanced over at Lieutenant Garrett Aaron, the tactical officer, who had been silently watching the exchange from across the room. "Lieutenant, what's our course?" "We're still on trajectory to reach the coordinates," Garrett said, adjusting his console. "At the current speed, we'll be there in 3 hours, but I advise caution. Unknown signal, abandoned sector, and now this. It doesn't sit right with me." "I agree," Darius said, his tone firm. "Prepare the crew for possible combat. We're approaching a dangerous unknown, and I don't like the feeling of this. Keep an eye on our shields and weapon systems. I want us ready for anything." As the minutes passed, Darius couldn't shake the feeling that they were heading into a trap. Something about the signal gnawed at him, a primal instinct telling him that danger was lurking just beyond the horizon. He returned to the command deck and stared out into the blackness of space, his mind racing. Whatever this was, it was only a matter of time before they found out. Unseen forces. The Aquila glided through the silent expanse of space, its path set on the coordinates of the mysterious distress signal. The crew, on edge since the discovery of the encrypted message, moved with a sense of unease, their eyes frequently flickering toward the main communications console as Lyra Morrow worked tirelessly to decode the last fragments of the signal. Every second that passed seemed to carry with it a rising sense of dread. In the medical bay, Dr. Irina Talvix was overseeing a routine checkup when something unusual caught her attention. Lieutenant Jacksrook, the ship's security officer, had come in to report a strange sensation of dizziness, his vision blurry, and his heartbeat erratic. As she took his vitals, she noticed that his pulse was unusually high, almost off the charts. "Are you feeling all right, Lieutenant?" Irina asked, her voice soft but laced with concern. Jack shook his head, a cold sweat dripping down his brow. "No, Doc. I've never felt like this before. It's like something's pushing in on my head. It's hard to think straight. But I'm fine. Just need a minute." Irina wasn't so sure. She quickly turned to her medical scans, but every reading seemed distorted. Abnormal electrical activity in his brain, an unusual fluctuation in his body's vital systems. Something was wrong, but she couldn't put her finger on it. She looked up at Jax, who appeared more disoriented by the second. "I'm sending you to the observation room," Irina decided. "You need rest. You're not well, and we can't risk your condition getting worse. I'll report this to Captain Aldren." Before Jax could respond, his knees buckled. He collapsed onto the floor, his face contorted in pain. Irina's medical training kicked in immediately. She hurried to his side, but as she knelt down to check his pulse, Jax gasped, his eyes wide in terror. I heard something," he whispered, his voice shaky. It wasn't just me. Something's in my head. In all our heads. It's like it's trying to make us see things, feel things that aren't real. And I'm not the only one, am I?" Irina felt a chill run down her spine as she helped Jax to his feet. She wasn't sure what he had just experienced, but one thing was clear. Something was manipulating their minds. Back on the bridge, Captain Aldren received Irina's message and ordered an immediate status check on the crew. As Ensign Lyra Morrow continued her decoding efforts, Garrett Aaron and the rest of the tactical team prepared for potential hostilities. Something was brewing, but no one could quite put their finger on it. Lyra's voice broke through the quiet of the bridge, a tremor in her voice. "Captain, I've deciphered another layer of the signal. It's not just a distress call. It's some kind of warning. It says," she hesitated, eyes scanning the screen. "It says, don't approach. Turn back." Darius clenched his jaw. "We're not turning back. We're going to find out who's out there." Lyra's fingers hovered over the console. "It also says, you're not alone." Captain Aldren felt his chest tighten. That could mean anything. But the timing of it, right as the crew began to show signs of illness and mental distress. It couldn't be a coincidence. At that moment, Sasha Viris, the ship's navigator, stepped forward, her face pale. "Sir," she began, her voice quivering, "I'm noticing some unusual gravitational anomalies in our path. Something's off. It's like we're being pulled toward a point ahead. We're on a direct course to the heart of the signal, but there's an unnatural pull. It feels like the ship is resisting the direction we're heading." "Adjust the course, Sasha," Darius ordered, though he could already feel the growing sense of dread creeping up his spine. Whatever was ahead of them, it wasn't natural. The warship was powerful, but even it couldn't escape the grasp of an unknown force. In the security quarters, Lieutenant Jax Rook sat alone, his mind racing as he tried to steady his breathing. The sensation of something crawling inside his skull was almost unbearable. He could feel it, something alien, something malicious, reaching out to him, to everyone. There was a deep, unsettling quiet in the room as his thoughts became more erratic. Suddenly, the room seemed to flicker. The lights dimmed, and shadows twisted unnaturally across the walls. Jax stood up, a cold shiver running down his spine. His vision blurred, and for a brief moment, he thought he saw the reflection of someone standing behind him in the mirror, tall, gaunt, with hollow eyes. He spun around quickly, but there was no one there. "Get a hold of yourself," he muttered under his breath, gripping the edge of the desk to steady himself. But deep down, he knew something had changed. The ship wasn't just being affected, it was alive in some way. And whatever was on board, whatever was trying to make them lose their minds, was starting to win. Dr. Irina Talvix, having sent Jax off to rest, wandered the ship's corridors in search of answers. As she passed through the lower decks, she felt an uncomfortable sensation in her chest, like a weight pressing down on her heart. The air felt thicker, more suffocating, as though something was lurking in the shadows. A low, unidentifiable hum reverberated through the walls, sending a strange shiver up her spine. Her medical expertise told her that there was nothing physically wrong with the ship's systems, no malfunction or reason for the distortion she had been noticing. But the mental and physical deterioration of the crew couldn't be ignored. It was as if they were all connected by some invisible thread, all suffering under the same unseen force. She reached the auxiliary control room and began reviewing the ship's internal systems. Her fingers danced over the touchscreen, trying to isolate the source of the disturbances. She was so engrossed in her task that she didn't notice the sudden drop in temperature until she felt it on her skin, a cold so intense it almost burned. Irina turned slowly, a wave of dread washing over her as she realized the room was now filled with shadowy figures, standing motionless, their faces obscured. The silence in the room grew deafening. Suddenly, the lights flickered and the figures vanished. Irina's breath caught in her throat, her hand trembling as she reached for the comms. Captain, something's happening. There's something aboard the Aquila. I don't know what it is, but it's not just in our heads." Back on the bridge, Captain Aldren stood frozen, listening intently to Irina's voice as she tried to describe what was happening below decks. He exchanged a look with Garrett, who seemed just as unsettled. "Prepare for anything," Darius ordered. "Lock down all entryways to the ship. We don't know what we're dealing with, but we're about to find out." The warship's secret. The Aquila floated in the eerie calm of space, its crew fraying at the edges. Captain Darius Aldren stood at the center of the bridge, watching as Ensign Lyra Morrow worked feverishly at her console, trying to piece together the remnants of the distress signal that had drawn them into this mess. Every passing hour seemed to stretch into eternity. The tension was thick in the air, and Darius could feel it settling into his bones. Something had changed aboard his ship. Whatever force was at work, whether alien, supernatural, or something far darker, was growing stronger. The crew's symptoms were getting worse. Irina's reports spoke of more individuals succumbing to unexplainable mental disorientation, physical deterioration, and bizarre hallucinations. No one was unaffected, not even the most seasoned officers. "I can't make sense of it," Lyra muttered, her eyes scanning the chaotic data. "It's like someone deliberately scrambled the information. But there's more. This signal. It's connected to something on the ship itself. The disturbance isn't just external, it's internal." Darius turned toward her, brow furrowed. "Internal? What do you mean?" "I think," Lyra hesitated, trying to find the right words. "I think the signal is coming from the Aquila itself. The ship is part of this whatever it is. It's not just a distress call. It's like a beacon, or a trap." At those words, the hairs on the back of Darius's neck stood up. If the Aquila was somehow linked to whatever was haunting them, there was no telling what other secrets the ship might be hiding. The ship's chief exobiologist, Sergeant Elias Drex, was staring at a display of the star map in one of the observation rooms, his mind racing. He had studied alien cultures, species, and phenomena for years, but the signal was something entirely different, something that defied all known logic. His gut instinct told him that there was more to the Aquila than its sleek exterior and combat-ready systems. He reached out for his communicator. "Captain, I think it's time we take a closer look at the origins of this warship." Darius's voice crackled through the comms. "What do you mean, Sergeant?" "I'm saying that the Aquila isn't just a military ship, sir," Elias responded. "It's older than we thought. Much older. I've been going through the ship's schematics, and some of the sections don't match anything in the database. Whoever built this ship, they weren't just military engineers. There's something almost ceremonial about it." Darius's heart skipped a beat. "What are you suggesting, Sergeant?" "I'm suggesting that we have to investigate the lower levels of the ship where it's been sealed off. There's something hidden down there, something that could explain the signal and the strange occurrences." Darius hesitated for a moment, considering the risks. The deeper they ventured into the Aquila, the more dangerous it seemed. But if they were to survive, they had no choice but to learn the truth. "Get your team ready, Sergeant. I want a full inspection. But tread carefully. Whatever we're dealing with down there, I'm not sure we can handle it." In the lower decks, a cold darkness enveloped Sergeant Elias Drex, his boots echoing through the empty hallways as he led a small team of officers toward a section of the ship that had been sealed for centuries. There were no lights here, just the dim glow of emergency panels that flickered as if in protest of the darkness. The walls seemed to pulse with a subtle energy, a vibration that could be felt through the soles of their boots, the air thick with an unsettling sense of ancient power. "This doesn't feel right," whispered Sienna Valter, the ship's engineer. "I've been all over this ship, but I've never seen anything like this before. These walls, they don't look like anything we've encountered." Elias nodded grimly. "That's because they aren't. Whatever this is, it's not just a military vessel. We're walking into something much older." As they rounded a corner, they came upon a massive door, covered in strange symbols. It looked like it hadn't been opened in centuries. Elias stepped forward, using the interface on his wrist to try and unlock it. "It's no use," he muttered. "There's no way to break through the seals." Just then, a flicker of movement caught his eye, a shadow shifting in the corner of the room. Elias turned quickly, his heart racing. Did anyone else see that? But there was nothing, just the darkness. "We're not alone down here," Elias said softly, more to himself than to the team. He moved closer to the door, his hand trembling slightly as he reached for a strange insignia on the panel. It was a symbol he hadn't seen before, yet it stirred something in his mind. As his fingers touched the insignia, the door shuddered, its seals unlocking with a low mechanical groan. A cold wind burst forth from the darkness beyond the door, making the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. "Stay alert," Elias ordered as he stepped inside. "Whatever's behind this door is not going to be friendly." The team ventured deeper into the ship's hidden corridors, the air growing colder with each step. A faint whisper seemed to echo around them, words just on the edge of hearing. It was as though the very walls were alive, holding on to secrets they were unwilling to reveal. At the end of the corridor, they entered a massive chamber. It was unlike anything they had ever seen, vast, ancient, and adorned with alien markings that seemed to glow faintly. The walls were lined with towering pillars, and in the center of the room stood a large, intricate device. Elias and the team approached cautiously, their steps echoing through the room. The device was a marvel of construction, alien technology, its purpose unclear, but there was something about it that felt ominous. "This is it," Elias whispered, his eyes fixed on the device. "This is the source of the signal." Sienna moved forward, reaching for the device's interface. "Let's see what it can tell us." But as her hand touched the surface, the room suddenly came alive. The walls seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy, and a low, eerie hum filled the air. A dark shape appeared in the center of the room, a shadow that shifted and writhed, as if it were made of darkness itself. The shadow took form, growing solid before their eyes, revealing a face, an alien, twisted visage that seemed to smile, its eyes glowing with malice. "We've found it," Elias muttered, his voice barely audible. "And now it knows we're here." Back on the bridge, Captain Aldren stared at the data coming through from the lower decks, his face grim. The signals were becoming stronger. The force on board was no longer a mere disturbance. It was something more. Darius's hand clenched into a fist. They were running out of time. "Prepare the crew for the worst," Darius ordered. "Get everyone to their stations. This is just the beginning." The awakening. The Aquila was no longer just a warship in deep space. It had become a vessel of dread, a haunted relic of something older and far more dangerous than anyone on board had ever anticipated. As Elias Drex and his team stared at the malevolent shadow in the center of the hidden chamber, the weight of what they had uncovered crashed down on them. The figure, its glowing eyes filled with ancient malice, moved toward them with an unsettling grace. "Do you understand now?" The voice was not spoken, but rather echoed directly in their minds. A chilling, unnatural presence reverberated through their skulls, twisting their thoughts. The alien's words felt like they were being carved into their very consciousness. Elias gripped his weapon tighter, his pulse quickening. What are you?" he demanded, his voice barely a whisper. The entity's laughter rippled through their minds. "I am the one who waits." the one who watches. You think you control this ship? Foolish humans. This warship is my prison, and you have released me. Sienna Valter backed away slowly, fear evident in her eyes. What do you mean, released you? This ship, it's ours now. It belongs to the fleet. The figure's eyes flashed brighter. No, it belongs to me. It was never meant for your kind. You are trespassers. A low hum filled the chamber, resonating through their bones, and the ship itself seemed to shudder in response. The lights flickered wildly, casting long, erratic shadows on the walls. It was as if the ship was alive in a way they could not comprehend. Elias and his team exchanged uneasy glances. Their comm units crackled to life, the static filled with a distorted voice. The voice of Captain Darius Aldren. Elias, what's going on down there? Darius demanded. We've been getting strange feedback from your signal. The systems are failing, and the crews deteriorating. Answer me now. Elias gritted his teeth. Captain, you need to listen. The Aquila, it's not just a ship, it's something else. The signal we've been tracking, it's coming from the heart of this place. Whatever's in here, it's not human. It's ancient, and it's controlling the ship. We've awakened something we shouldn't have. The voice on the comms went silent for a moment. Then Darius's voice returned, tinged with urgency. Get out of there, now. We're going to seal off the lower decks, but we need you back. This ship isn't just malfunctioning. It's alive. Elias's heart raced. Understood, Captain. But we can't leave without. The alien presence interrupted, its cold voice lacing their minds once again. Flee, if you wish, but you cannot escape me. I have been imprisoned here for millennia, and now I am free. You will not live long enough to warn your people. A deafening roar filled the chamber, and the floor trembled violently. The shadows around them twisted into monstrous shapes, their limbs stretching unnaturally as they began to move. The very walls seemed to distort as if they were no longer solid but part of something far more sinister. We have to get out of here, Elias shouted, but his command was drowned out by the cacophony of creaking metal and terrifying whispers that filled the air. On the bridge of the Aquila, Captain Aldren's crew struggled to maintain control. The ship was bucking under strange forces. The artificial gravity fluctuated, throwing crew members off balance. Lights flickered wildly, plunging them into darkness before flashing back on with an unsettling intensity. Captain, Ensign Lyra Morrow shouted, I'm losing control of the ship's systems. It's like something is hijacking the controls. Darius clenched his fists, his mind racing. They were fighting something far more dangerous than they had anticipated. He glanced at his tactical officer, Garrett Aaron, who was frantically trying to lock down the lower levels of the ship. We need to seal off the entire ship now, Darius ordered. Get every hatch, every door locked down tight. If there's a force on board that's interfering with the systems, we need to isolate it. Fast. Garrett's fingers flew over the console, but his face grew pale as he read the readouts. It's no use, Captain. The lower decks are sealed, but the intrusions, they're not coming from outside the ship. The disturbance is coming from within, from somewhere deep inside. Darius's gaze hardened. They had no choice now. They had to confront the entity within. Prepare a team to head down to the lower decks, Darius commanded, his voice unwavering. We're going to face whatever this is head-on. Meanwhile, in the depths of the Aquila, Elias and his team sprinted down the corridor, their footsteps echoing in the empty halls. The ship groaned around them, the very structure of the vessel protesting as if trying to eject them. The shadows seemed to stretch after them, reaching out with icy fingers, and the whispers grew louder, more insistent. Sienna, can you override the lockdown? Elias barked as they rounded a corner, the lights above them flickering erratically. Sienna was breathless as she worked on the console. I can try, but something's fighting me. The ship's systems aren't responding to my commands properly. Just then, A low rumble reverberated through the ship, and a screeching noise echoed from the direction they had just come. Elias's heart skipped a beat as he realized the ship's walls had started to shift, twisting in on themselves, changing shape as though the vessel itself was coming alive. "Get to the hangar," Elias shouted. "We need to get out of here now." But as they pushed forward, the room around them began to warp. The door to the hangar wouldn't open. Instead, it split apart into a gaping maw, and from it emerged a flood of shadowy figures, twisted, horrific versions of the crew. Their faces were contorted in grotesque expressions, their eyes hollow and filled with a void that seemed to absorb all light. The figures advanced, their movements unnatural, gliding toward them as though gravity had no hold on them. "Run," Elias yelled, pulling Sienna along with him. But they couldn't escape. Not now. Back on the bridge, Captain Aldren was preparing for the inevitable. He knew his team was already deep in the heart of the Aquila, facing something that no one could have predicted. There was no more time for hesitation. They had to end this nightmare before it consumed them all. "Garrett, make sure the crew is ready. We fight whatever's down there," Darius said with determination. "Whatever's controlling this ship, it ends today." With a deep breath, Darius walked toward the nearest airlock, his mind made up. He was going to save his crew or die trying. The Aquila trembled again, its hull screaming in protest. The entity that had waited so long for freedom was now fully awake, and nothing would stop it from taking control of the warship. And the crew of the Aquila was about to face their worst nightmare, the final confrontation. The Aquila had become a living nightmare. Its once proud hull now creaked and groaned as if it were alive, its systems completely corrupted by the malevolent force that had awoken deep within its structure. The lights flickered in and out, the air heavy with an oppressive tension, and the very atmosphere of the ship felt thick with dread. The crew, once the finest soldiers in the fleet, now fought against an invisible enemy, one that moved through their minds, warping their perceptions, and bending them to its will. Captain Darius Aldren stood at the airlock, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew that what lay ahead could be their last stand, but he couldn't afford to turn back now. His crew was depending on him, and whatever this entity was, it had to be stopped. "Ready the teams," Darius said, his voice cold but resolute. "We need to confront whatever's controlling this ship, now." Ensign Lyra Morrow and Garrett Aaron stood by his side, both of them grim but determined. "We'll stick with you, Captain," Garrett said, his voice steady, though his eyes betrayed the fear lurking beneath the surface. They had no time to waste. Every second counted now, as the shadows continued to warp around them. The air itself seemed to hum with an unnatural energy, growing louder with each passing moment, like the heartbeat of the ship was accelerating. "Let's move," Darius commanded. The team made their way down the corridors, weapons drawn, ready for anything. They passed through halls that once gleamed with the technological marvels of the Aquila, now twisted and distorted by the presence within. The walls shifted as though the ship was responding to the entity's will, each turn more disorienting than the last. As they moved deeper into the ship's core, the whispers became louder, voices that clawed at their minds, trying to break their resolve. Darius could feel the pressure building inside his skull. It was as if something was trying to invade his thoughts, make him doubt his decisions, turn him against his own crew. "Stay focused," he muttered under his breath, clenching his fists. "Captain, we're almost there," Lyra said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is the section of the ship where the signal originated. It's all coming from here." They rounded a corner and came upon a massive chamber, its walls adorned with alien symbols that seemed to pulse with life. In the center of the room stood the source of the disturbance, a vast, dark machine, its surface etched with incomprehensible markings. The air around it shimmered, and the temperature in the room dropped several degrees, making their breath visible in the icy chill. "That's it," Garrett said, his voice tight with disbelief. "That's the heart of the ship." Darius stepped forward, his hand hovering over the controls on his wrist. "We need to destroy it. If we don't, this ship, this thing, will consume us all." But as his fingers brushed against the console, the shadows in the room seemed to deepen, swirling around them like a living thing. The dark presence from within the ship made itself known once again, its voice a haunting echo in their minds. "Foolish humans," the entity's voice hissed, the words vibrating in their skulls. "You cannot stop me. This ship is mine. It was always mine." The shadows in the room coalesced into a figure, a grotesque, towering creature of shifting darkness, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. Its form was nebulous, ever-changing, like the very fabric of reality was being distorted by its presence. "I am the one who was imprisoned here," the creature continued, its voice seeping into their thoughts. "And now, I am free. Your petty technology cannot contain me. I will consume your minds, and this ship will be my vessel once more." Darius's grip tightened on his weapon. "Not today," he said, his voice low but filled with fury. "We're ending this nightmare." The team opened fire, their weapons unleashing a hail of energy blasts, but they were absorbed by the creature's form, vanishing into the shadows like they had never existed. The air around them grew colder, and the shadows grew more aggressive, swirling violently and reaching for them. "Captain, it's not working," Lyra shouted, panic creeping into her voice. Darius's mind raced. They were fighting an enemy that was not bound by the same laws of physics as they were. Whatever this entity was, it was beyond anything they had ever encountered. But they couldn't give up. Not now. They had to find a way to destroy it. "Focus fire on the machine," Darius ordered. "That's where the signal is coming from." The team turned their attention to the machine, unleashing everything they had left. But it was no use. The shadows were everywhere, consuming their energy, turning their attacks against them. The room was alive with chaos, the creature's form shifting and warping as it advanced on them. "You cannot escape me," the entity hissed, its presence enveloping them. "I am the end. I am eternal." Just as Darius was about to give up, something inside him snapped. He remembered the artifact, the strange relic they had discovered in the ship's lower levels, the one that had seemed out of place, the one that had felt wrong. "Wait," Darius shouted, his mind suddenly clear. "The relic. It's a key." Before he could finish, the creature lunged, its tendrils of shadow wrapping around him, pulling him into its dark embrace. The last thing he saw before his vision blacked out was the flicker of the alien artifact, pulsing with a strange light. When Darius regained consciousness, he was lying on the cold metal floor of the chamber, his body aching, his mind foggy. But the shadows were gone. The machine in the center of the room had stopped pulsing, its power drained. The Aquila was silent. The crew was scattered around him, some on the floor, others still standing, looking around in disbelief. The air felt different, thinner, almost lighter. The oppressive presence that had haunted the ship was gone. Lyra was the first to speak, her voice trembling. "Is it over?" Darius stood slowly, feeling the weight lift from his shoulders. He glanced at the alien artifact, which now sat dormant on the floor. Its purpose was unclear, but it had been the key to defeating the entity that had controlled the ship. "I think so," Darius said, his voice hoarse but resolute. "But we'll need to study this further. We need to understand what happened here, and how we can make sure it never happens again." The crew exchanged glances, exhaustion etched on their faces. They had survived, but at what cost? The Aquila was no longer just a warship. It had become a battleground, a vessel that had carried them to the brink of destruction and back. Darius took one last look at the ruined machine. "We'll get through this, together. And we'll make sure no one else falls victim to whatever was here." The entity may have been defeated, but the scars of its presence would remain. As the crew of the Aquila began the long process of recovering from the ordeal, they couldn't help but wonder what other dark secrets the universe was hiding, and whether they were ready for whatever came next.